The emergency room was busy that Friday night, and Claire Bennett was tired from working 2 shifts in a row. But she kept moving because people needed help, and that was what she did. She was only 26 years old, but she had been a nurse for 6 years, and she was good at her job, even though some doctors did not always listen to her. The doors burst open and a man ran inside carrying a small boy who looked very sick, and Claire knew right away that something was seriously wrong with the child. The man wore a military uniform with medals on his chest, and his eyes were wild with fear as he shouted for help and begged someone to save his son. Claire rushed over and took the boy from the father's arms and laid him on a stretcher. While asking what happened, and the father said his name was Jake Morrison and his son Danny had been fine just 30 minutes ago. But then he collapsed at home. She looked at Danny and saw that his lips were blue, and his breathing was very weak, and his skin felt cold to the touch, which were all bad signs that meant he was in serious danger. Claire knew these symptoms well, because she had seen them before, and she recognized that Danny was having a severe allergic reaction called anaphylactic shock, which could kill him in minutes if he did not get treatment right away. She called for the doctor, but Dr. Gerald Hayes was in another room dealing with a car accident victim and would not be free for several minutes, which was time that Danny did not have. The hospital had rules about this kind of situation, and those rules said that a nurse could not give certain medications without a doctor's approval first, because only doctors were allowed to make those big decisions. But Claire looked at Danny and saw that his breathing was getting worse, and his body was starting to turn a darker shade of blue, and she knew that if she waited for the doctor to come, then this little boy would die right in front of his father. She made her choice in less than 2 seconds, because sometimes you do not have time to think about all the rules when someone is dying in front of you and you know exactly what they need to stay alive. Claire grabbed the emergency kit from the wall and pulled out a shot of epinephrine, which was the medicine that could stop an allergic reaction and save Danny's life if she gave it to him fast enough. Her hands did not shake as she prepared the injection, because she had done this before, and she knew she was doing the right thing, even though it meant breaking the rules that could cost her everything. She pushed the needle into Danny's leg and pressed the medicine into his body, and then she grabbed the equipment she needed to help him breathe better, because his airway was closing up from the swelling. Within seconds, the medicine started working, and Danny's breathing became stronger, and the blue color began to fade from his lips as oxygen finally reached his blood again. Jake Morrison stood there watching, and tears ran down his face as he saw his son start to breathe normally again, and he knew that this nurse had just saved Danny's life. Dr. Hayes arrived 2 minutes later and looked at what Claire had done, and his face turned red with anger, because she had given medication without his permission, which was against hospital policy. He did not care that Danny was now breathing and alive, instead of dead, and he did not care that Claire had made the right medical decision, because all he cared about was that she had broken the rules. Jake tried to explain that Claire saved his son's life, and that without her quick action, Danny would have died, but Dr. Hayes was not interested in hearing about it. The doctor said that protocols existed for a reason, and that nurses who thought they could make decisions like doctors were dangerous, and he walked away to write a report about what Claire had done. Claire knew what that report meant, and she knew that her career was probably over, but when she looked at Danny breathing peacefully on the stretcher, she did not regret what she had done. The rest of her shift passed in a blur as other nurses whispered about what happened, and some of them looked at her with sympathy while others looked at her like she was foolish for throwing away her career. When her shift ended at midnight, she was called to the hospital administrator's office, which was never a good sign, especially at that time of night. The administrator was a thin woman with gray hair who looked tired and unhappy about having to deal with this situation, but she had made her decision before Claire even sat down. She told Claire that the hospital could not tolerate staff who refused to follow proper procedures regardless of the outcome, and that this was not personal, but they had to let her go. Claire was given 15 minutes to clean out her locker and collect her things, and then security escorted her out of the building like she was some kind of criminal, instead of a nurse who had just saved a child's life. She walked to her car carrying a cardboard box with her belongings, and she sat in the driver's seat for a long time before she could make herself start the engine. Inside the hospital, Jake Morrison stood beside his son's bed and watched Danny sleep peacefully, and the doctors had confirmed that without Claire's immediate action, his son would have died within 3 minutes. Danny had taken a new medication that day and nobody knew he was allergic to it until his body started shutting down. And if they had waited even 30 more seconds, it would have been too late. Jake asked a nurse what happened to Claire, and the nurse quietly told him that she had been fired for breaking protocol, and Jake felt sick to his stomach because this woman saved his only child and lost everything because of it. He got Claire's full name from the hospital records before they could hide it, and he spent the next hour on his phone making calls to people who owed him favors and people who had the power to change things. What the hospital staff did not know was that Jake Morrison was not just a regular Marine officer, and he was not wearing that uniform just for show at some ceremony. Jake worked for an organization that most people did not even know existed, and he had connections that reached far beyond any normal military chain of command. He was going to make sure that Claire Bennett did not suffer for saving his son's life, and he was going to make sure she understood that there were people in this world who valued doing the right thing over following stupid rules. By the time the sun came up, Jake had made 6 phone calls and set in motion a series of events that would change Claire's life in ways she could never imagine. Claire drove home in a daze, and she could not believe that her entire career had ended in a single night, just because she saved a child's life. She had worked so hard to become a nurse, and it took her 6 years of studying and working part-time jobs and taking care of her sick grandmother while trying to pass all her exams. Her grandmother had died 2 years ago, and Claire was alone in the world with no parents and no brothers or sisters, and nursing was all she had. Now that was gone too, and she knew that getting fired for breaking protocol would make it almost impossible to get hired at another hospital, because they would all see her as someone who could not follow rules. She sat in her small apartment and looked at the cardboard box with her things, and she felt more alone than she had felt in years. Claire had student loans to pay and rent to pay, and now she had no job and no way to pay for anything, and she did not know what she was going to do. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Danny's blue face and remembered the feeling of knowing that a child was dying and that she had the power to save him. She knew she had made the right choice, and she would make the same choice again, even knowing what it would cost her, because some things mattered more than rules and keeping your job. Back at the hospital, Jake Morrison sat beside his son's bed and watched Danny sleep peacefully, and the doctors said he would make a full recovery and be able to go home in 2 days. Jake could not stop thinking about Claire and how she lost everything for saving Danny, and he felt responsible for what happened to her, even though he knew it was not really his fault. He used his phone to search for information about Claire Bennett, and he found out that she had no family and that she worked her way through nursing school while taking care of her dying grandmother. He learned that she graduated at the top of her class and that other nurses said she was one of the best they had ever worked with because she really cared about her patients. Jake felt even worse knowing that this kind and skilled nurse was now unemployed and probably struggling to figure out what to do with her life. But Jake Morrison had resources that most people did not have, and he had connections that reached into places that most people did not even know existed. His uniform said he was a Marine, and that was true, but it was not the whole truth, because Jake worked for a secret organization called the United Earth Defense Force. 3 years ago, humanity made first contact with an alien species called the Velorans, and everything changed. But the government kept it secret from most of the world. The Velorans were peaceful and advanced, and they wanted to work with humans, but only a few people knew about them. And Jake was one of those people. His real job was working as a liaison between the human military and the Veloran diplomatic corps, and he spent most of his time at a secret facility in Colorado, coordinating between the two species. The Velorans had amazing technology and medicine that was far ahead of anything humans had, and they had been studying human culture and society to understand how to work with people from Earth. One thing that fascinated the Velorans was human medicine, and especially emergency medicine, because humans had developed ways of saving lives in crisis situations that impressed even these advanced aliens. Jake picked up his phone and called his commanding officer at UEDF headquarters and explained what happened with Danny and how a nurse saved his son, but got fired for it. His commander listened and agreed that what happened to Claire was wrong, but said there was not much the UEDF could do about hospital politics. Then Jake made his second call And this one was to someone with much more authority, and this person was not human. He called Healer Sentinel Lyra, who was the head of the Valoran Medical Concordat, and someone Jake had worked with many times over the past 3 years. Jake explained the whole situation to Lyra and told her how Claire saved Danny's life by breaking hospital rules and how she was punished for doing the right thing. There was a long silence on the other end of the call, and then Lyra spoke in her musical voice that the translation device turned into perfect English. She said that what happened to Claire was shocking and wrong, and that in Valoran society a healer who saved a life would be honored, not punished. The Valorans had something called the healer's imperative, which was a sacred principle that said a healer must always act to save a life, even if it meant breaking rules or risking personal consequences. Lyra was disturbed that human society would punish someone for following what the Valorans considered the most basic and important duty of any medical professional. She asked Jake many questions about Claire and about her background and her training, and her skills as a nurse. Then Lyra said something that surprised Jake, and she said that the Valoran Medical Concordat had been looking for human medical professionals with exactly the qualities that Claire had shown. She said that most human doctors and nurses they had worked with were skilled but hesitant, and they waited for permission and approval even in emergencies. But Claire had acted immediately without hesitation because she knew what needed to be done, and that was exactly the kind of person the Valorans wanted to work with. Lyra told Jake that she wanted to meet Claire and offer her a position working with the Valoran medical team, and Jake was surprised, but also relieved, because this could be Claire's chance at something better. They talked for another hour and made plans, and Lyra said she would come to Earth with a team and they would meet Claire in person. Jake agreed and gave Lyra all the information about where Claire lived, and when they finished the call, Jake felt better knowing that maybe something good could come from this terrible situation. He looked at Danny sleeping peacefully, and he promised his son that he would make sure the woman who saved his life would be okay. Jake did not sleep that night, because he was too busy making arrangements, and by morning everything was ready for something that Claire could never expect. Claire woke up the next morning to a sound that made her apartment shake, and at first she thought it was thunder from a storm, but the sound was too regular and mechanical. The deep thumping noise grew louder and louder until her windows rattled. In their frames and pictures on her walls started to vibrate. She got out of bed and walked to her window, and when she looked outside, she could not believe what she saw. 3 massive helicopters were descending from the sky toward the parking lot of her apartment building. And these were not normal helicopters like the news helicopters or police helicopters she had seen before. These aircraft were sleek and black, with smooth surfaces that looked almost like liquid metal, and they had technology visible on their sides that she did not recognize from any military equipment she had ever seen. The helicopters had no normal military markings or numbers, and they moved with a grace and silence that seemed impossible for such large machines. Claire watched in shock as the 3 aircraft landed in her parking lot, and people started coming out of the apartment building to see what was happening. The helicopter doors opened and figures in dark uniforms began to emerge, but then Claire saw something that made her heart stop. Mixed in with the human soldiers were 3 beings that were clearly not human, and they were taller than any person, with long limbs and skin that seemed to shimmer with colors like oil on water. Their heads were slightly larger than human heads, and their eyes were big and almond-shaped and seemed to glow with a soft light. Claire backed away from the window, and her mind was racing because she was looking at aliens, and real aliens, not from movies or books, but actual, living beings from another world. She did not know what to think or what to do, and then someone knocked firmly on her door 3 times. Claire stood frozen for a moment, and then she walked slowly to her door and looked through the peephole. Jake Morrison stood outside her door, but he was not wearing his Marine uniform anymore, and instead he wore a different uniform that was dark blue with silver insignia that she did not recognize. Behind Jake, she could see 2 other human soldiers and one of the alien beings, and they all stood there waiting for her to open the door. Claire's hands shook as she unlocked the door and opened it, and Jake looked at her with an expression that was both serious and kind. He said her full name, Claire Bennett, in a formal voice, and told her that he was there on behalf of the United Earth Defense Force and the Valoran Medical Concordat. He said they needed to talk about what she did yesterday when she saved his son, and that they needed to talk right now. Claire could not find words to respond, and she just stood there staring at Jake and the alien behind him. The alien stepped forward, and when it moved, it was graceful like a dancer, and it stood next to Jake looking at Claire with those large, glowing eyes. Then, the alien spoke, and its voice was like music or singing. But somehow Claire could understand every word as if it was speaking perfect English. The alien said that its name was Healer Sentinel Lyra, and it was from the Valoran Medical Concordat, and that Claire's actions yesterday had brought her to their attention. Lyra asked if they could come inside and talk with Claire, and her voice was gentle, but there was something in it that made Claire understand. This was very important. Claire stepped back and let them enter her small apartment, and suddenly, her living room felt impossibly tiny, with 3 humans in uniforms and 2 aliens inside. The second alien introduced itself as Medical Coordinator Zen, and it had the same shimmering skin and large eyes as Lyra, but was slightly shorter. Jake told Claire to sit down, and she did because her legs felt weak, and she could not believe this was really happening. Jake began to explain, and he told her that 3 years ago, humanity made first contact with an alien species called the Valorans. He said that the government kept this contact secret from most people because they were worried about how the public would react, and they wanted to establish good relations first. The Valorans were peaceful and advanced, and they belonged to a group of alien species that traveled between stars and helped each other. Jake explained that the Valorans specialized in medicine and healing, and they were very interested in learning about human medical practices. Claire listened and tried to process everything she was hearing, but it was too much and too strange, and she felt like she was dreaming. Then Lyra spoke again and explained that the Valorans had a sacred principle called the Healer's Imperative. This principle said that when a healer sees someone dying, they must act immediately to save that life, no matter what rules or protocols say, and no matter what the personal cost might be. Lyra said that this principle was the foundation of all Valoran medicine and society, and that healers who followed the imperative were honored and celebrated. When the Valorans heard that a human nurse saved a child's life by following this same principle but was punished for it, they were shocked and disturbed. Zen activated a small device, and suddenly images appeared in the air above Claire's coffee table, showing injuries and diseases and medical situations from many different alien species. Zen explained that the Valorans had been developing an exchange program where human medical professionals could learn alien medical techniques and the aliens could learn from humans. They had been searching for human healers who had the right qualities and the right instincts, and when they heard about Claire, they knew she was exactly what they were looking for. Jake looked at Claire and said that they wanted to offer her a position, but not on Earth. He said the position was at the Concordat's flagship medical station in orbit around Saturn, where she would be Earth's first human medical liaison to an alien species. Claire sat there trying to understand what they were saying, and she looked from Jake to the aliens and back again. She had lost her job yesterday, and now less than 24 hours. Later, aliens were offering her a position in space working with beings from another world. It was too much to process, and she did not know what to say, or think, or feel. They spent the next hour explaining everything to Claire, and her small apartment felt like it had become the center of something much bigger than she could understand. Lyra told her about the Valoran Medical Station, which was a huge facility that orbited Saturn and served as a training center and emergency hospital for their section of space. The station treated patients from 5 different alien species, including humans and Valorans, and 3 others that Claire had never heard of human. Doctors and nurses had been working there for the past year as part of a secret exchange program, but they needed someone with Claire's specific abilities. Lyra explained that most human medical professionals were skilled and dedicated, but they struggled with making quick decisions without getting permission first. They would see a patient dying and know what needed to be done, but they would wait for a supervisor, or a doctor, or someone with more authority before they acted. Claire did not do that, and when she saw Danny dying, she acted immediately because she knew that waiting would kill him. That quality of being able to make critical decisions under pressure without hesitation was rare and valuable, and exactly what the Valorans needed. Jake explained the practical details and told Claire that she would be commissioned as an officer in the United Earth Defense Force Medical Corps, with a rank equivalent to lieutenant. Her salary would be more money than she ever made as a hospital nurse, and her student loans would be paid off completely. She would receive training in treating alien patients and learning medical technology that was decades ahead of anything on Earth. The assignment would last for 3 years, and after that she could choose to extend it or return to Earth, where she would be able to work at any hospital she wanted. Jake said that her experience working with aliens would make her one of the most qualified medical professionals on Earth, and hospitals would compete to hire her. Claire listened to all of this, and it sounded wonderful. But she was also scared because this was so far beyond anything she had ever imagined for herself. She looked at Lyra and Zen and said quietly that she was just a nurse and she was not special, and she just did what anyone would do. Zen looked at her with those large glowing eyes and said that was exactly why she was special. Many people would not have acted the way she did, and many people did not act that way even when they had the chance. Claire acted because it came naturally to her to put saving lives above protecting herself, and that quality was what made her valuable. Zen said that a father still had his son because of what Claire did, and how many other fathers and mothers and children across multiple species might keep their loved ones if Claire continued to do what came naturally to her. Claire felt tears in her eyes because yesterday she thought her life was over, and today aliens were telling her that she could save lives across the galaxy. She looked at Jake and remembered the terror in his eyes when he brought Danny into the emergency room, and she remembered how relieved he looked when his son started breathing again, thought about the hospital that fired her, and the system that punished people for doing the right thing when it went against the rules. Then she thought about the possibility of being part of something bigger than hospital politics and bureaucracy. She could work with beings from other worlds and learn medicine that no other human nurse knew, and help build bridges between species. Claire asked how much time she had to decide, and Jake said they needed an answer today because Lyra and her team had to return to the station soon. If Claire agreed, she would leave Earth in 3 days and begin her training immediately. 3 days to pack up her life and leave the planet and everything she knew behind, to work in space with aliens. It was insane and impossible and terrifying, but Claire realized that she did not have much keeping her on Earth anymore. She had no family and no job, and no real future as a nurse because getting fired would follow her everywhere. But more than that, Claire realized that she wanted to do this because it felt right in the same way that saving Danny felt right. Sometimes you had to trust your instincts and take risks and believe that things would work out even when you were scared. Claire looked at Lyra and Zen and Jake and took a deep breath. She said yes, and she would accept their offer, and she would go to the medical station and do her best to help whoever needed it. Lyra smiled, and it was the first time Claire saw a Valoran smile, and it was beautiful and strange at the same time. Jake looked relieved and proud, and he told Claire that she was making the right choice and that his son's life had led to something wonderful. The group spent another hour going over details and paperwork and arrangements. Claire would report to a military facility in 3 days, where she would receive her uniform and initial briefing. From there, she would be transported to the medical station on a spacecraft that could make the journey to Saturn in just a few hours. She would undergo 6 weeks of intensive training to learn about Valoran biology and medical technology, and the customs of the different species she would work with. After training, she would be assigned to work in the emergency response bay where critical cases from across the system were brought for treatment. When Lyra and Zen and the others finally left, Claire stood in her apartment and looked around at her small, ordinary life that was about to end. In 3 days she would leave Earth and begin a journey that most humans did not even know was possible. She thought about calling someone to tell them what was happening, but she had no one to call. Her grandmother was dead, and she had no close friends because she spent all her time working at the hospital. So Claire sat down and began making lists of what she needed to do before she left. She would pack her most important belongings and put everything else in storage and cancel her apartment lease and pay her final bills. It was strange how easy it was to leave when you had nothing holding you in place. That night, Claire barely slept because her mind kept returning to the image of the 3 black helicopters landing in her parking lot and the alien beings stepping out. 24 hours ago, she was unemployed and hopeless, and now she was preparing to leave Earth and work in space. Life could change so quickly and in such unexpected ways. 3 days passed in a blur of packing and paperwork and saying goodbye to the only life Claire had ever known. She reported to a military facility outside the city and was given a dark blue uniform with silver medical insignia that marked her as part of the UEDF Medical Corps. She met other human medical staff who were also going to the station, and they all looked as nervous and excited as she felt. Then they boarded a spacecraft that was nothing like the rockets she had seen on television. And this ship was smooth and white with alien technology built into every surface. The flight to Saturn took only 4 hours, which seemed impossible. But the ship moved faster than anything humans had built on their own. Claire sat by a window and watched Earth shrink away behind them until it was just a blue dot in the darkness. She felt scared and sad to leave, but also excited about what was waiting for her. When they approached Saturn, the medical station came into view, and Claire's breath caught in her throat. The station was enormous and beautiful with elegant curves and gleaming metal that reflected Saturn's light. It was much bigger than any space station humans had ever built, and ships of all different designs were docked at ports. Around its surface, their ship docked and Claire followed the others through corridors that were wide and clean with lighting that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She saw Valorans walking past, and also beings from other species, including some that were shorter and covered in fur and others that moved on 4 legs instead of 2. Everyone moved with purpose, and there was a feeling of organized activity like a busy hospital, but on a scale Claire had never imagined. The training began immediately, and it was intensive and difficult, but also fascinating. Claire learned about Valoran biology and discovered that while they were different from humans, in many ways, their basic systems were similar enough that much of her nursing knowledge still applied. They breathed oxygen and had hearts that pumped blood and organs that filtered waste from their bodies. But they also had some organs that humans did not have, and their blood was slightly different in color and chemistry. She learned about the other species too, and each one had its own unique biology and medical needs. The technology amazed her because the Valorans had devices that could heal wounds in minutes, and scanners that could detect diseases at levels that human medicine could not reach. But what impressed Claire most was the Valoran approach to medicine, which was based on the healer's imperative. In Valoran society, a healer had authority that went beyond normal ranks and rules. If a healer said that a patient needed immediate treatment, then everyone else had to step aside and let the healer work, no matter who they were or what rules existed. This principle was taught to Valoran children from birth, and it was embedded in their laws and culture. The idea that preserving life was the highest calling, and that protocols existed to serve the patient, not the other way around. Claire thought about how different this was from the hospital where she had worked, where following rules was more important than saving lives. She met the other human medical staff and discovered that each of them had a similar story to hers. One doctor had been fired for performing emergency surgery without waiting for insurance approval. A paramedic had been suspended for giving pain medication to a dying patient without proper authorization. Another nurse had lost her job for speaking up about unsafe patient ratios that were putting lives at risk. All of them had been punished by the human medical system for putting patients first, and now they were here, where those same instincts were celebrated and valued. The weeks of training passed quickly, and Claire absorbed everything she could learn. She worked alongside Valoran healers and learned their techniques, while also teaching them about human emergency medicine. The Valorans were impressed by some human medical approaches, especially the way humans had developed to save lives with limited resources and technology. After 6 weeks, Claire was assigned to the emergency response bay, which was the medical station's equivalent of an emergency room. This was where the most critical cases were brought and where healers had to make quick decisions under pressure. Her first real test came when a human transport ship suffered an accident and came to the station with multiple casualties. The emergency bay filled with injured crew members, both human and alien, who had been on the ship. Claire found herself working next to Lyra, treating a Valoran engineer who had severe injuries from the explosion that damaged the ship. She used her human nursing skills combined with the Valoran technology, and between them they stabilized the patient and saved his life. The work was intense and exhausting, but Claire felt more alive and useful than she had felt in years. She was doing what she was meant to do and saving lives without having to worry about protocols or getting permission or protecting herself from administrators. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and Claire settled into her new life on the station. She made friends with the other human staff and with some of the Valoran healers who appreciated her skills and her willingness to learn. She treated patients from all 5 species and learned that while their bodies were different, their pain and fear and hope were universal. A Valoran mother crying over her injured child looked the same as a human mother in the same situation. Claire realized that being a healer meant the same thing everywhere regardless of what species you belonged to. 4 months into her assignment, Claire received a message from Earth, and it was from Jake Morrison. He told her that Danny was doing well and that he talked about her often and wanted to be a doctor when he grew up. Because of what she did for him, Jake thanked her again for saving his son and for accepting the position with the Valorans. He said that news of her work was spreading on Earth and that people were starting to learn about the Valoran exchange program. Claire was happy to hear from Jake, but she did not spend much time thinking about Earth anymore. This station had become her home, and these beings, both human and alien, had become her family. She was exactly where she needed to be, and doing exactly what she was meant to do. The emergency alarm woke Claire from a deep sleep, and she was on her feet and in uniform within 2 minutes, because that was how things worked on the station. She ran to the emergency bay and found it already filling with staff preparing for incoming casualties. Lyra met her at the entrance and explained quickly that a Valoran diplomatic vessel had been attacked by an unknown hostile force while passing through their sector. The ship was badly damaged, but had managed to reach the station and was carrying wounded, including some very important passengers. Claire took her position and prepared her equipment, and within minutes the first patients started arriving on stretchers. Most of the injuries were serious, but treatable, and Claire worked alongside the other healers, stabilizing patients and sending them to surgery when needed. Then they brought in Ambassador Kale, and Claire saw immediately that his condition was critical. Lyra rushed over and explained that Kale was one of the most important Valoran diplomats working with Earth, and his loss would be devastating to human and Valoran relations. But more than that, he was a person who needed help, and that was what mattered to Claire. She ran her scanner over Kale's body and saw the damage on her screen, and her heart sank because the injuries were severe. He had internal bleeding near an organ that was similar to a human heart, but different enough that treatment was complicated. The senior Valoran healers gathered around Kale and began discussing what to do. They ran scans and analyzed data and talked about different treatment approaches. One healer suggested waiting for a specialist who was on another ship and would arrive in about an hour. Another wanted to run more simulations to determine the safest surgical approach. Claire watched the discussion and looked at her scanner, and she saw something that the others were missing. The bleeding pattern looked familiar to her because she had seen something similar in a human patient back on Earth. That patient had a torn blood vessel near their heart, and if Claire had not operated immediately, the person would have died. The anatomy was different, but the principle was the same, and Claire could see that the damage was getting worse with each passing second. She spoke up and told the senior healers that they needed to operate now because the bleeding was cascading and would become catastrophic in just a few minutes. One of the healers looked at her with doubt and said they needed more time to analyze the situation. Another said the specialist would be better equipped to handle such a delicate case. Claire looked at her scanner again and saw the bleeding spreading, and she knew with absolute certainty that Kale would die if they waited. This was the same moment she had faced with Danny when she had to choose between following rules and saving a life. She took a breath and made her decision. She said clearly that she was invoking the healer's imperative and that she was going to operate now. She told anyone who wanted to assist to prepare for surgery and everyone else to clear the space. There was a moment of shocked silence because a human nurse had just invoked the most sacred principle of Valoran medicine to override senior Valoran healers. Then Lyra stepped forward and said that Claire was right, and that she could see it now that Claire had pointed it out. Lyra said she would assist Claire and began preparing the surgical equipment. Other healers hesitated but then began to help, because the healer's imperative was not something you could argue with once it was invoked. Claire worked with focus and precision, using her knowledge of human emergency surgery combined with what she had learned about Valoran anatomy. Lyra guided her through the specific differences in Valoran tissue and organ placement. Together they located the source of the bleeding and used Valoran medical technology to repair the damaged vessel. The surgery took 2 hours and it was delicate and difficult, but Claire never doubted her decision. She had seen this injury pattern before and she knew what needed to be done, and the fact that the patient was Valoran instead of human did not change the basic medical reality. When they finished, Cale's vital signs were stable, and the bleeding had stopped and he would survive. Claire stepped back from the surgical table and felt exhaustion wash over her, but also satisfaction because she had done what needed to be done. The senior healers who had doubted her looked at the results and had to admit that she had been right. If they had waited for the specialist or run more simulations, Cale would have died. Claire had trusted her instincts and her experience, and she had correctly invoked the healer's imperative in a situation involving Valoran patients, and Valoran healer's word of what happened spread quickly through the medical station because it was unprecedented for a human to invoke the imperative and be proven right. Within hours, the story had reached the Valoran diplomatic corps and the human military command, and both were amazed and impressed. The human government on Earth was informed, and the media began picking up the story of the nurse, who was fired for saving a life, and who now saved an alien ambassador. Claire tried to avoid all the attention and just focused on her work, but everyone wanted to talk to her and thank her and tell her she was amazing. Lyra found her resting after a long shift and sat beside her. Lyra said that Claire had proven something very important, which was that the principles of healing transcend species and culture. A good healer with strong instincts and courage could save lives anywhere, regardless of whether they were treating their own species or another. Claire thanked Lyra for trusting her and helping her, and Lyra said that was what partners did. A few days later, Ambassador Cale woke up and asked to see Claire. She went to his room and found him sitting up in bed looking weak but alive. He thanked her in his musical voice and told her that she had given him back his life. Then he said he wanted to do something for her in return, and Claire tried to say that was not necessary, but Cale insisted. He told her that he was going to award her the Star of Healing, which was the highest honor in the Valoran Medical Concordat. No human had ever received this honor before, and the ceremony would be attended by leaders from multiple species and broadcast across both Earth and Valoran space. Claire did not know what to say, and she felt overwhelmed but also deeply honored. The ceremony took place in the main assembly hall of the medical station, which was a huge space with windows that looked out at Saturn and its rings. Dignitaries from 5 different species attended, along with human military officers and government officials who had flown up from Earth. Claire wore her UEDF uniform and stood on a platform in front of hundreds of beings, both human and alien. Ambassador Kyle walked slowly to the platform because he was still recovering, but he insisted on presenting the award himself. He spoke about the healer's imperative and how it was the foundation of Valoran civilization. He said that in all his years, he had never seen someone embody this principle more perfectly than Claire Bennett. She had been punished by her own people for following the imperative, and yet she did not let that break her spirit. She came to the station and learned about alien medicine, and when she faced a critical situation, she trusted her training and her instincts and saved his life. Kyle placed the Star of Healing around Claire's neck, and it was a beautiful medallion that glowed with a soft light. The entire hall erupted in applause, and Claire felt tears in her eyes because this was so different from being escorted out of the hospital with her belongings in a box. The ceremony was broadcast to Earth, and millions of people watched as a nurse from their planet received the highest honor from an alien civilization. The administrators at Riverside General Hospital watched the broadcast, and they realized they had made a terrible mistake. Dr. Hayes watched and felt shame because he was the one who reported Claire and caused her to be fired. The hospital faced immediate public backlash as people learned that they had punished a nurse for the same qualities that aliens were now celebrating. News stations interviewed medical professionals who said the hospital's protocol was wrong and that Claire had done exactly what any good nurse should do. Within a week, the hospital director issued a public apology, and Dr. Hayes was quietly reassigned to a different department. The director sent a message to Claire offering her full reinstatement with a promotion and a significant raise. They wanted her to come back and work in their emergency department as a senior nurse with authority to make critical decisions. Claire read the message and thought about what to do. She could return to Earth and have any job she wanted at any hospital, because now she was famous and experienced and highly qualified. But as she sat in her quarters on the medical station and looked out at Saturn's rings, she realized that she did not want to go back. Earth had rejected her when she needed support, and the Valorans had embraced her and given her a place where her skills and instincts were valued. More than that, she was doing important work here that went beyond any single hospital or career. She was building bridges between species and showing that humans could contribute to the galactic community. She wrote a polite message declining the hospital's offer and thanking them, but explaining that she was needed where she was. The story of her decision made news on Earth, and many people understood and respected her choice. She was not just a nurse anymore, but a representative of humanity working alongside aliens to save lives across species. Jake Morrison brought Danny to visit the station a few weeks after the ceremony. Danny was 8 years old now and completely healthy and full of questions about everything he saw. Claire gave them a tour of the medical bay and introduced Danny to Lyra and some of the other healers. Danny told Claire that he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up because of her, and she felt proud and touched by his words. Jake thanked Claire again for everything and said that saving Danny had set in motion changes that went far beyond his family. Because of Claire, more humans were interested in joining the medical exchange program, and more young people wanted to become doctors and nurses. She had shown that human medical professionals had value in a galaxy full of advanced species. After Jake and Danny left, Claire returned to work and continued treating patients from multiple species. She trained new human recruits who came to the station. Inspired by her story, she worked with Valoran healers developing new techniques that combined human and alien approaches to medicine. The Valoran Medical Concordat established a formal training program named after Claire, where human and alien medical professionals could learn from each other. Over the next few years, hundreds of humans and aliens went through the program, and it changed medicine for both species. Claire was promoted to coordinator of interspecies medical training and given authority to shape how humans and aliens learned to work together. She thought often about the night when she was fired and how hopeless she had felt sitting in her car with a box of her belongings. 24 hours later, 3 helicopters had appeared at her door, and her life changed completely. She had gone from being unemployed and alone to being part of something that connected species across the stars. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted was necessary to find what you really needed. Claire understood now that she had not been fired for breaking rules, but for following a deeper principle that transcended any human system. The healer's imperative existed in her heart long before she met any Valorans. She just needed to find people who recognized and valued it. As she stood at the window of the medical station looking out at Saturn, she felt grateful for every choice she had made. She had trusted her instincts with Danny, and again, with Ambassador Kale, and both times it had been the right decision. The universe had a way of rewarding people who put principles above convenience and lives above protocols. Claire had found her place in the galaxy, and it was better than anything she could have imagined back on Earth. 5 years had passed since the night Claire was fired from Riverside General Hospital, and her life had changed in ways she never could have predicted. The medical station that orbited Saturn had become her home, and the beings who worked there had become her family. She was now the director of the Claire Bennett Medical Exchange Program, which was named after her and trained medical professionals from multiple species. Over 200 human doctors and nurses had gone through the program, learning about alien medicine and sharing human techniques. An equal number of Valoran healers had studied human emergency medicine, and they were amazed by how humans could save lives with limited resources. The program had expanded to include 3 other alien species who wanted to learn from both humans and Valorans medicine across 5 different civilizations. Was better because beings from different worlds were willing to learn from each other. Claire received a message one day saying that a school group from Earth was visiting the station, and she agreed to give them a tour. When the students arrived, she was surprised to see Danny Morrison among them, and he was 12 years old now and had grown tall. He ran over to hug Claire, and she was happy to see him healthy and full of energy. Jake had come as a chaperone, and he smiled at Claire with pride and gratitude. Claire showed the students around the medical bay and introduced them to healers from different species. She explained how the different species worked together and how each one brought unique knowledge and skills to help patients. The students asked many questions, and Claire answered patiently because she remembered being young and curious about the world. After the tour, Danny stayed behind to talk with Claire privately. He told her that he was definitely going to be a doctor and that he wanted to work on the station someday, just like she did. Claire felt touched and proud that the little boy whose life she saved now wanted to follow in her footsteps. Danny asked her if she ever regretted the decision that got her fired, and Claire looked out the viewport at Saturn's beautiful rings. She told him that she did not regret it for even a second. Sometimes, the right choice looked like it would cost you everything. But if you were brave enough to make it, you might discover that losing what you thought you wanted opened the door to finding what you really needed. She placed her hand on Danny's shoulder and told him something important. She said that he saved her life just as much as she saved his because his crisis brought her to the attention of people who valued her skills. She told him to never forget that small actions can have big consequences, and that he should never let anyone tell him that rules matter more than lives. Danny nodded seriously and promised that he would remember as the school group prepared to leave. Danny looked back at the massive medical station with all its ships and equipment and beings from different worlds. He knew then with absolute certainty what his future would be. He would study hard and become a doctor, and someday he would come back here and continue the work that Claire started. After they left, Claire returned to her office and sat down to review the applications from new candidates who wanted to join the exchange program. Each application told a story of a medical professional who wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. Some had been rejected by their own systems like Claire had been. Others simply wanted to learn and grow and help beings from other worlds. Claire approved several applications and sent messages, welcoming them to the program. Each new recruit represented another bridge between species and another chance to save lives that might have been lost. That evening, Lyra came to Claire's quarters and they sat together looking out at Saturn. Lyra said that the Valoran High Council had been discussing humanity's role in the galactic community. They were impressed by how quickly humans learned and adapted and how willing they were to work with alien species. More importantly, they were impressed by the human quality that Claire represented, which was the courage to make difficult decisions when lives were at stake. Lyra said that humanity's contribution to the galaxy would not come from weapons or technology, but from this fundamental belief that every life was worth fighting for. Claire thought about this and realized that Lyra was right. Humans were not the most advanced species or the strongest or the smartest, but they had something special, which was the ability to act with courage and compassion, even when it cost them everything. That night, Claire could not sleep, and she walked through the quiet corridors of the medical station. She passed the emergency bay where she had saved Ambassador Kale and the training rooms where she taught new recruits. She walked to the observation deck and stood at the window looking out at the stars. She thought about the journey that brought her here, starting with that terrible night when she was fired. She thought about the 3 helicopters appearing at her door less than a day later, and how her entire world changed in that moment. She had been scared and uncertain, but she chose to take the risk and trust that something good could come from her disaster. Now she stood on a space station orbiting Saturn, working with beings from other worlds and training the next generation of healers who would bridge species and cultures. She had not just found a new job, but a new purpose that went beyond anything she dreamed possible. The nurse who was fired for saving a life became the healer who bridged worlds, and the boy she saved would grow up to continue that bridge, carrying forward the lesson that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not science or strength, but the unwavering conviction that every life, no matter how different, no matter how alien, was worth saving. Claire smiled and placed her hand on the window, feeling the cold glass beneath her palm. Beyond the glass was the infinite darkness of space, filled with countless worlds and countless beings. Some of those beings would get sick or injured, and they would need help because of what Claire started, there would be healers ready to help them. Healers who understood that the principles of medicine transcended species. And borders healers, who knew that when someone was dying, you acted immediately regardless of protocols or personal cost. Healers who lived by the imperative that every conscious being understood in their heart, even if they did not have words for it. Claire turned away from the window and walked back to her quarters. Tomorrow would bring new patients and new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference. She had found her place in the universe, and it was exactly where she was meant to be. The 3 helicopters that appeared at her door 5 years ago were not just coming to recruit her. They were coming to show her that humanity's place among the stars would be secured not through weapons or conquest, but through the same qualities that made her save a dying child against all protocols. Courage and compassion, and the unwavering belief that some principles transcend rules and species, and even worlds. Claire Bennett had been fired for following those principles, and now she helped teach them to beings across the galaxy. Her story would be told for generations as an example of how one person's courage in a moment of crisis could change the course of history for an entire species. And somewhere on Earth, a 12-year-old boy named Danny dreamed of the day when he would return to the station and continue the work that the nurse who saved his life had started.